In honor of the new Tesla car dealership on the White House lawn yesterday, I wanted to make a video drawing comparisons from our current reality to that of the movie Idiocracy, which is one of my favorite films and is not too far off from the reality we are currently living in. The lead protagonists of this film, Joe and Rita, played by Maya Rudolph and Luke Wilson, did a phenomenal job portraying people that were stuck 500 years in a dystopian future where capitalism had gotten so out of hand that it was interwoven not only in the government, but also in everyday life, to the point where Joe's lawyer's name was Frito, like Frito-Lay's. But don't worry, because in the future, Costco is the #1 top brand and store to go to still. That's how correct they got this movie. Costco was the place to go for all your daily lifetime needs. See, being a politician became less about actually being political and educated and more about brand sponsorships and corporations shaping the futures of law and our society. So much so that things like cafes became adult entertainment facilities that would allow you to not only get a coffee, but it would also allow you to get, well, you know. Don't worry, President Camacho had some very loyal supporters that believed and had faith in everything and anything that he did, regardless of him being a popular wrestler before he was elected. Isn't it funny how in this movie, the person in charge is somebody who was just a wrestler and putting on an entertaining show, and in our reality, the person in charge was a reality TV star who ran 6 businesses into the ground. It just is so palpable that life imitates art, I cannot help but laugh. Brando was a Gatorade Monster-like energy drink that everyone used instead of water in this dystopian future, to the point where people would give it to their babies instead of baby formula or milk, thinking that it was actually doing good for their children and the environment. But food was running out and President Camacho was facing a lot of pressure from his people to figure out how to make crops grow. So he hires everyday average Joe, who used to be a non-smart individual in his past, and now in the future is the smartest man on the planet. And Joe suggests a wild concept. What if we put water on the crops instead of Brando? Now, for anyone wondering, well, how did society get that way? How did we get there in this movie? That is because couples like Trevor and Carol, who really wanted to have kids, put their careers and their educations first. They were savvy and smart people who understood that with the current wage and the economy, they could not afford to have children. And by the time they were ready to have kids as older adults, Carol and Trevor could not have children because of health issues. Therefore, they were not able to raise highly intellectual children to lead the future generations. They also very likely faced real issues like access to healthcare and trying to pay off their student loans instead of being able to raise a child. Then we meet Cleavon and his wife, who did not really care about contraceptives. They did not really care about having a good education. They just cared about acting like jackrabbits and producing massive amounts of children for future generations. Something I find very interesting about the character Cleavon is you can't spell Cleavon without spelling E-L-O-N. If you know, you know. And that is the biggest parallel that I wanted to personally draw in this movie to reality. Because you don't have to be a billionaire necessarily to go procreate with a bunch of women and leave them hanging as single parents while you go take care of efficiency. So because Cleavon and his wife dominated future generations with their children and their family tree, people who were intellectual and educated and were trying to look out to have a better future, like Carol and Trevor, were not able to continue their lineages. And that's one of the reasons why people in this movie were put in the circumstances they were in. Thanks, Cleavon. Now, President Camacho was not a bad man, like some other person I could mention. He actually wanted good for his people. He was just kind of going into a system that had already been established for at least 5 generations before him. He knew that by hiring Joe, he could fix things. He realizes that Joe is actually right. The water on the crops is actually helping them grow. And this looks like it's going to give them hope for a better future. And unlike the current person in charge, President Camacho decides to put his faith in logic and intellectualism instead of brands and corporations, and knows that with Joe in charge helping his administration, they can have a better future for everyone and hopefully teach people new things so that they can survive for future generations to come. So when we sit here and we ask ourselves, how did we get here? It's not too hard to deny the reality of things that we saw in this film and current events that are taking place in our own reality. The difference of the man in charge in the movie and the man in charge of real life, the man in charge of real life only cares about money. He unfortunately does not care as much as President Camacho did about the people and about making things better. President Camacho was able to understand and comprehend it's not about brand deals or corporate sponsorships. It's about the people that trust you to give them a better future. And when we already live in a society where media literacy is in decline due to presidential acts like the No Child Left Behind Act in the early 2000s, which just normalized and forced standardized testing instead of actually learning the materials and how to critically think and analyze for yourself as an individual, well, that also is going to contribute to people really not caring if the Department of Education ceases to operate, which is very likely about to happen. And so if we have more Cleavons than we do Trevors or Carols, what is going to happen in our current reality in the future, years from now, regardless of who's in charge? When someone like the average Joe 500 years from now becomes the smartest man alive, that says a lot about where we're headed, I think. And I just had to make some social commentary about this because every day I wake up and I see so many parallels between our current reality and this film. I'm not saying that either one of these families would have chosen a specific person during an election cycle. We don't know. But what we do know is that we need intellectualism. We need people that care about us having a brighter future. And if people that are intellectuals cannot afford to be able to have children or are worried about our society or go into debt to get an education to do so, the people who care less about things like contraception and education are just going to continue to procreate for future generations and further put us into the mess that we are already in. There is a big portion of our society that understands the ethics and moral consequences of the decision that was made in November. They are very likely people who thought and were cautious about the future, just like Trevor and Carol, but did not understand or perceive the consequences of the people like Cleavon who were going to cause future generations to honestly not care about anything. People became so uninformed and uneducated in this movie that they forgot the basic instincts of parenthood, like feeding your baby formula or milk instead of energy drinks, how to use basic water to grow crops. In fact, most scripted television shows and movies went out the window in exchange for comedy shows and sitcoms that just caused pain and harm to the contestants that brought laughter and joy to the people watching them mindlessly. They became an entire generation of people who just mindlessly consumed so much content that its sole purpose was to cause harm and pain to the contestants and the people on these shows so that they could enjoy their suffering while being viewers and consumers of other people who were in pain and suffering on these shows. And now, because of people who enjoy that kind of entertainment and think that they are not going to be affected by the consequences of their decisions, well, we end up with a smart car dealership on the White House lawn. Have a great day.